3 days before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I opened the door to my new home and found my sister in my fiancé arms. She had stolen from me my entire life, but this time I did not cry. I got even. My name is Clara, and I am 33 years old. As a forensic accountant, my career is built on finding things people desperately hide. I trace dirty money and uncover corporate fraud. I am trained to remove emotion and look purely at facts, but nothing prepared me for the facts in my own master bedroom. It was Tuesday, 3 days before my wedding. I left the office early to drop off centerpieces at the new house in Winnetka. I paid 80% of the down payment on this property, pouring a decade of savings into it. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was silent, but a trail of clothing led up the stairs. I recognized the charcoal fabric immediately. It was Trent's bespoke suit bought specifically for our rehearsal dinner. Further up lay a pile of seafoam green silk. It was a vintage Dior dress. I knew who it belonged to because I lent my younger sister Brittany the money to buy it last month. I walked up the remaining stairs without a sound. I reached the master bedroom and pushed the door open. There they were. Trent, my fiancé of 2 years, and Brittany, my 30-year-old sister. The golden child of our family. They were tangled together in the bed I paid for. Most brides would scream, throw vases, or demand answers. I did none of those things. The analytical part of my brain that dismantled white-collar criminals took over. I took a step back, pulled my phone from my pocket, framed the shot to capture both their faces, and snapped a high-resolution photo. The camera shutter clicked, a sharp sound echoing in the hallway. Trent's head snapped up. His eyes widened in absolute terror as he scrambled to pull the duvet over his chest. Brittany let out a pathetic gasp. I did not wait for excuses. I turned around and walked away. Trent shouted my name, stumbling out of bed, but I was already heading down the stairs. My pulse was steady. My mind was completely clear. I walked out the front door, locked it behind me, and got into my car. I sat in the driver's seat for exactly 1 minute, listening to the engine. Then I opened my phone and navigated to our family group chat. The group included my parents, my brother David, extended relatives, and Brittany. They had been using this chat all week to coordinate country club attire for the wedding weekend. I attached the photograph I had just captured. I typed a single simple sentence: "The wedding is canceled. Trent and Brittany can keep the bed." I hit send. I watched the progress bar inch across the screen until the image was successfully delivered to 20 different family members. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and pulled out of the driveway, watching Trent sprint out the front door in his boxers, waving his arms frantically in my rearview mirror. Less than 2 minutes passed. My phone began to vibrate violently. The screen lit up with my mother's name, Patricia. I answered it through my car's Bluetooth. I expected tears. I expected her to ask if I was okay or express horror at what her youngest daughter had done. Instead, the cabin filled with her furious voice. "Clara, what is wrong with you?" my mother yelled. "Why on earth would you send something so vulgar into a group chat that includes your Aunt Susan and Uncle George? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for our family?" I merged onto the highway, keeping my eyes fixed ahead. "Mom, I just caught my fiancé sleeping with my sister in my house. And your first concern is Aunt Susan seeing a picture." "You are acting completely unhinged," Patricia snapped. "You are making a public spectacle of a private matter. This is going to be the talk of the entire North Shore. Everyone at the golf club will know. You could have pulled Trent aside. You could have talked to your sister like a civilized adult. Instead, you throw a tantrum and embarrass all of us just days before the biggest social event of our year." I gripped the steering wheel. Her words washed over me, toxic and heavy, but entirely predictable. In her world, appearances were everything. The truth was just an inconvenience that needed to be swept under an expensive rug. "You are right, Mom," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "It is very embarrassing for Brittany to be caught sleeping with her sister's fiancé." "That is not what I mean, and you know it," she countered, her tone dripping with venom. "You have always been jealous of your sister. You have always looked for ways to sabotage her happiness. Trent is a successful wealth manager. He is stressed. Men make mistakes when they are under pressure. But sending that photo, That was a deliberate, vicious attempt to destroy your sister's reputation on the internet. You need to delete that message immediately and send another one saying your phone was hacked. We are not canceling this wedding. We have guests flying in from out of state. I let out a dry, hollow laugh. The wedding is off, Mom. I am certainly not marrying a man who sleeps with my own sister in my own house. I tapped to end the call, cutting off her frantic screaming. As the silence filled the car, I felt the last lingering thread of attachment to my family sever completely. They had made their choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. My phone rang again before I even reached the next intersection. The caller ID displayed my father's name, Richard. I slowly answered. I expected him to be the voice of reason. He understood contracts and facts. His voice came through the speakers, sharp and commanding, lacking parental warmth. "Clara, what are you thinking?" he demanded. "Your mother is practically hyperventilating in the kitchen." "Do you know how many prominent investors are attending this wedding on Saturday? Trent's partners are flying in. We have senators on the guest list." I listened to his tirade with a bizarre sense of detachment. "Dad," I said calmly. "Trent was sleeping with Brittany. In my house. Do they want to attend a wedding for a cheating fraud?" Richard let out a very heavy sigh. "Listen to me. You are the logical one. Let us look at this practically. Trent is a highly visible wealth manager. He thrives in social settings, networking events, and gala dinners. Brittany is an influencer. She lives for the spotlight. If we are being completely honest here, Trent fits Brittany's lifestyle better anyway. You hate those high society events. You prefer hiding behind spreadsheets." I stared at the road ahead, gripping the steering wheel. "Are you justifying his infidelity over country club dinners?" "I am looking at the big picture," Richard snapped back. "And the big picture includes a $150,000 wedding venue that has been paid in full. The floral arrangements, the ice sculptures, the catering from that Michelin-starred chef, it is all non-refundable. We are not throwing away $150,000 because your feelings got hurt. That money was an investment in our image. You are going to sign the venue rights over to Brittany. We will announce the wedding is celebrating Brittany's engagement to Trent. It is unconventional, yes. But people love a dramatic romance. Trent's investors will still have their party, our country club friends will still have their open bar, and we save our social standing. You get to walk away quietly without making a scene. Do not be selfish and ruin this for your sister just because things did not work out the way you planned." He actually wanted me to hand over my dream wedding to the sister who slept with my fiancé. He wanted to preserve his social standing over his own daughter's dignity. The sheer audacity of his demand hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He waited for my compliance, accustomed to me always backing down to keep the peace. I did not argue. I did not scream. I simply tapped the red button on my steering wheel to end the call and turned off my phone completely. The sudden silence in the car was deafening, but it perfectly matched the absolute emotional numbness spreading through my chest. For 33 years I had played the role of the reliable, invisible scapegoat. I was the daughter expected to excel quietly, fund my own education, and solve my own problems without inconveniencing anyone. Brittany was the golden child. From the moment she was born, she was handed the spotlight, the unconditional praise, and the family resources. If she wanted expensive ballet lessons, my parents hired a private instructor. If she recklessly wrecked her car, my father rushed to the dealership and bought her a brand new luxury SUV the very next day, simply because he could not bear to see his precious daughter shed a single tear over her own terrible choices. When I secured my job as a forensic accountant at a top financial firm, my parents barely acknowledged it. But when Brittany reached 10,000 followers on Instagram, they threw her a catered party. They had always demanded my sacrifice to fuel her success. Now they were literally demanding my wedding. They expected me to step aside and watch my sister marry my betrayer, all to protect their precious country club reputation. The ultimate betrayal was not just Trent slipping into my bed with my sister. It was my parents aggressively demanding I make the bed for them. I drove aimlessly for an hour before pulling into the parking lot of a cheap, nameless motel on the outskirts of the city. It was the kind of place that accepted cash and asked zero questions about why a woman in a tailored suit was checking in at noon on a Tuesday. I paid for 3 nights, took the metal key, and walked into a room that smelled of stale smoke and harsh cleaning chemicals. I dropped my purse onto the floral bedspread and sat at the rickety desk. Any normal bride would be sobbing violently on the floor, frantically calling her bridesmaids for comfort, or mourning the completely shattered illusion of her picture-perfect future. I did not cry. My tears had dried up years ago when I finally realized my family would never love me the way I needed them to. Instead of falling apart, I reached into my heavy leather bag and pulled out my work laptop. It was a high-powered machine loaded with auditing software, data extraction tools, and encrypted networks. Trent thought I was just a boring corporate drone who crunched numbers for a steady paycheck. My parents thought I was a spineless pushover who would always bend to their demands to keep the fragile family peace. Brittany truly thought she had won the ultimate prize by stealing my glamorous, wealthy fiancé right out from under my nose. They were all wrong. I took a slow breath, cracked my knuckles, opened the laptop screen, and watched the bright blue light illuminate the dark, dingy motel room. If they wanted to play games with my life, my money, and my professional future, I would gladly show them exactly how a forensic accountant handles a hostile family takeover. I slowly booted up the encrypted system, locked the motel room door behind me, and prepared to dig deep into their lies. The sun barely breached the horizon when my phone, now turned back on, buzzed with a sharp text from my mother, demanding my immediate presence at the family estate in the North Shore. I had spent the entire night running preliminary background audits, my eyes burning from the harsh blue light of the motel room screen, but I showered, put on a sharp blazer, and drove to the house I grew up in. Walking through the heavy oak front doors, I was instantly hit by the familiar scent of lemon polish and fresh lilies. My mother always made sure the house smelled perfect for guests, and clearly she viewed Trent as a highly valued guest rather than the man who had just blown up my life. I stepped into the expansive living room, my heels clicking softly against the pristine hardwood floor. The scene before me looked like a perfectly staged photograph for a luxury lifestyle magazine. Trent and Brittany were sitting close together on the plush white linen sofa, their fingers tightly intertwined. Trent wore a casual but expensive cashmere sweater, looking entirely too relaxed for a man caught cheating 24 hours prior. Brittany rested her head on his shoulder, wearing a designer sundress and a delicate gold necklace that I immediately recognized. I had paid for that necklace as a birthday gift to her last year. My father, Richard, stood by the grand stone fireplace swirling a glass of expensive bourbon, despite it barely being 10 in the morning. My mother, Patricia, hovered nervously behind the sofa, like a fiercely protective guard dog, resting her hands lightly on Brittany's shoulders. The sheer audacity of the tableau was staggering. I was the one who had been deeply betrayed, yet the entire room was physically positioned to defend Brittany and Trent from my presence. I stood near the entryway, folding my arms across my chest, refusing to take the empty armchair they had left for me. The silence stretched thick and heavy. No one offered an apology. No one looked ashamed. Instead, Trent gave me a look that mixed pity with bold arrogance, gently squeezing my sister's hand. "Clara," my father finally said, breaking the suffocating tension. "We are glad you decided to be sensible and join us. Have a seat. We have a lot of crucial logistical matters to discuss regarding Saturday." I remained standing, my face an absolute mask of professional indifference. "I am perfectly fine right here," I replied evenly. Brittany immediately let out a dramatic trembling sigh and buried her face into Trent's chest. He stroked her highlighted blonde hair, casting a protective glare in my direction. "Clara, you have to understand," Brittany murmured, her voice muffled against his cashmere sweater, before she looked up with wide, tear-filled eyes. "We truly never meant for any of this to happen. It was a complete accident. We just could not help falling in love. You were always at the office working late, staring at those boring financial reports. Trent was so lonely and I was just trying to be a good friend to him." Trent nodded in solemn agreement, sitting up straighter to project an air of righteous authority. It is the truth, Clara. You have to admit we have been growing apart for months. You are entirely too obsessed with numbers spreadsheets and auditing corporate accounts to ever make a man like me happy. I need a partner who understands the demands of my social calendar. A woman who knows how to host a dinner party, network with my investors, and appreciate the finer things in life without questioning every single credit card receipt. Brittany understands my world. She makes me feel alive, whereas you just make me feel like a liability on a balance sheet. Patricia stepped around the sofa, nodding vigorously as she wiped a non-existent tear from her own eye. Trent is absolutely right, Clara. You have always been far too rigid and clinical. You lack the natural warmth and charm required to thrive in our social circles. Brittany is simply better suited for a high-profile marriage. You should honestly be thanking her. She saved you from a lifetime of mutual misery. If you had just paid more attention to your relationship instead of your career, perhaps Trent would not have been forced to seek affection elsewhere. I listened to this coordinated psychological attack with utter fascination. They were masterfully spinning a narrative where I was the cold, neglectful villain, and my cheating fiancé and backstabbing sister were the tragic star-crossed victims. The gaslighting was so intensely calculated, it was almost impressive. Brittany sniffled again, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. I really hope you can find it in your heart to be happy for us, Clara. I know you will eventually realize that this is exactly how things were always meant to be. Richard cleared his throat and stepped forward, placing a thick stack of legal documents onto the glass coffee table. He pushed a sleek silver pen toward me. This is the contract transferring the rights of the country club wedding venue, the catering deposits, and the floral arrangements directly over to Brittany and Trent. Since you are the primary account holder on the bookings, the club requires your physical signature to authorize the transfer. I looked down at the documents, then up at my family. Their faces were tense with anticipation. They fully expected a fight, a breakdown, a desperate plea for justice. Instead, a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I realized in that exact moment how utterly pointless fighting them would be because I was going to destroy them systematically. I picked up the pen and signed my name on every single dotted line without hesitation. The relief in the room was immediate and entirely sickening. Richard smirked, patting Trent on the back. Patricia beamed at Brittany. They genuinely thought they had won and crushed me once again. I set the pen down, turned my back on their smug celebration, and walked out the front door to finish building their financial coffin. I drove straight back to the rundown motel on the outskirts of the city, my mind operating with total clarity. The scent of stale smoke and cheap disinfectant no longer bothered me. I locked the heavy deadbolt, pulled the flimsy curtains shut, and sat down at the chipped laminate desk. I opened my laptop and connected to my secure mobile hotspot. I was no longer Clara, the betrayed fiancée, or Clara, the discarded daughter. I was Clara, the senior forensic accountant the woman corporations paid top dollar to find the dirty secrets hidden deep within their ledgers. Emotion is the enemy of a good investigation. It clouds your judgment and makes you miss the subtle anomalies that lead to the truth. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, pushing the image of Trent and Brittany out of my brain entirely. When I opened them, I saw only numbers. A memory suddenly surfaced, sharp and demanding. 6 months ago, Trent and I had opened a joint savings account to pool funds for the house closing and the wedding expenses. I deposited the bulk of the money using the bonus I earned from a major corporate audit. About 2 months ago, Trent came to me looking slightly stressed. He claimed he needed temporary access to a large sum of liquid cash to cover an unexpected broker's commission on a massive commercial real estate deal his firm was closing. He promised his own bonus would cover it within a week, and he simply needed to show liquidity to his managing partners. Because I loved him and trusted him, I gave him the authorization without a second thought. I never checked the account balance again because I was entirely focused on the wedding planning and my own workload. That was my first mistake, but it was a mistake I was about to rectify with ruthless precision. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. It was time to see exactly what kind of broker my charming fiancé really was. I logged into the joint banking portal, bypassing the primary dashboard, and pulling the raw transactional data directly into my proprietary auditing software. The program immediately began categorizing debits, credits, and wire transfers, highlighting irregular patterns in bright red text. I watched the screen as the algorithm processed the history of the account over the past 60 days. The results materialized, and a cold wave of realization washed over me. Trent had not just been unfaithful in our bed, he had been violently unfaithful with my finances. The balance, which should have sat comfortably at 6 figures to cover our upcoming property taxes and final vendor payments, was utterly decimated. He had not made a single deposit to replace the funds he supposedly borrowed for his broker's commission. Instead, he had executed a highly calculated series of withdrawals. The software highlighted 42 separate transactions. They were structured to fly under the radar, kept just below the reporting thresholds that would trigger an automatic alert from the bank. He moved funds in increments of $4,000 or $7,000, routing them through a digital payment processor to obscure the final destination. I ran a quick aggregate sum on the diverted funds. The total hit the bottom of my spreadsheet with devastating finality: $80,000. Trent had siphoned exactly $80,000 from my hard-earned savings. My heart beat in a slow, steady rhythm as I analyzed his methodology. He was a wealth manager, so he knew exactly how to manipulate the system to avoid raising red flags with the fraud department. He assumed I was too busy picking out floral arrangements and tasting catering menus to ever notice the slow, systematic bleeding of our joint assets. He had treated my savings account like his own personal slush fund. The betrayal cut much deeper than the physical affair. Sleeping with my sister was an impulsive act of lust and ego. Stealing $80,000 through dozens of structured transfers was a premeditated, malicious operation requiring weeks of active deception. He sat across from me at the dinner table, kissed me goodnight, and discussed our future children, all while systematically draining the safety net I had spent a decade building. I did not feel tears. I felt pure, unadulterated focus. I needed to know exactly where my money went. I launched a secondary tracing protocol to follow the digital footprints Trent tried to hide. The payment processor he used was secure, but not completely invisible to someone with my specific skill set. I unraveled the dummy accounts he set up and followed the money trail directly to its endpoints. The first major chunk of my savings, approximately $55,000, had been wired to a series of offshore servers located in the Caribbean and Malta. I cross-referenced the server IP addresses with international financial registries. They were high-stakes offshore sports betting and unregulated online gambling syndicates. Trent did not have a temporary cash flow problem. He had a massive, crippling gambling addiction, and he was feeding it with my money. The remaining $25,000 followed a very different path. The trace led back domestically, landing in the merchant account of an exclusive boutique jeweler located right in the heart of downtown Chicago. I pulled the jeweler's public sales records and matched the transaction date to a specific purchase order. The receipt detailed a custom-crafted piece featuring a delicate gold chain and a rare teardrop diamond. My mind instantly flashed back to the family meeting in my parents' living room just hours ago. I pictured Brittany resting her head on Trent's cashmere sweater, looking up at me with those fake, tear-filled eyes. Resting against her collarbone was a delicate gold necklace with a teardrop diamond. I had originally thought it was a piece I bought her for her birthday last year. I was wrong. The necklace she was so proudly flaunting on her Instagram and wearing to my face was bought and paid for using the exact money Trent stole from my savings account. The golden child was literally wearing my stolen funds around her neck. A dark, terrifying clarity settled over me. I closed the banking portal and opened a new blank dossier on my desktop. I leaned back in the cheap motel chair as the horrifying realization washed over me. For 2 years, I believed Trent pursued me because he loved me. I thought he admired my intelligence and respected my career. Looking at the catastrophic ruin of his financial reality, the truth hit me with sickening clarity. Trent did not love me. He targeted me. He was a drowning man, and I was the most durable life raft he could find. As a senior forensic accountant, I had a massive stable income, zero debt, and an absolutely pristine credit score. I was the perfect financial shield. He needed my pristine financial history to secure the mortgage on the $1 million Winnetka property, because his own background would never have survived a legitimate deep dive audit. He needed my name on the paperwork to legitimize his fraudulent existence. His plan was parasitic and brilliant in its cruelty. Once we signed the marriage certificate, our assets would be legally bound. He would have unfettered access to my future earnings, my bonuses, and my impeccable credit line. He intended to use my financial stability to quietly plug the gaping holes in his client accounts, keeping the federal investigators off his back, while he continued to feed his gambling addiction. I was never going to be his partner. I was going to be his unwitting sponsor. And then there was Brittany. My beautiful, shallow sister had swooped in thinking she had stolen the ultimate prize. She saw the bespoke suits, the expensive dinners, and the undeniable charm. She genuinely believed she had snatched a wealthy, glamorous executive right out from under her boring number-crunching older sister. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh out loud in the empty room. Brittany wanted a luxury lifestyle funded by endless wealth. Trent needed a rich, stable wife to save him from federal prison. Instead, they had chosen each other. They were two parasites who had accidentally latched onto the exact same sinking ship. Trent could never afford Brittany's endless thirst for designer brands and country club status, and Brittany could never provide the financial bailout Trent desperately needed to stay out of a high-security prison cell. By sleeping together and destroying our engagement, they had completely ruined their own survival plans. They thought they had broken my heart, but in reality, they had just handed me the keys to their mutual destruction. I did not just have the power to cancel a wedding anymore. I had the evidence to end his entire career and send him to federal prison. The investigation was not over, though. If Trent was this desperate for cash, I needed to know who else in my orbit he had infected. The core index funds remained technically intact, but the overall liability column flashed a brilliant, blinding red. A massive lien had been attached to the primary account. A staggering $500,000 collateral loan had been executed against my grandfather's trust just 3 weeks ago. My heart slammed against my ribs. I had absolutely not authorized a loan of any kind. I had not spoken to the wealth managers handling this specific portfolio in over 6 months, let alone requested a $500,000 liquid cash injection. I immediately pulled the execution documents from the digital archive, my eyes scanning the heavily formatted legal text. The PDF files loaded line by line. I scrolled past the boilerplate liability clauses straight to the final authorization page. There it was, sitting stark and black against the white digital paper. My signature. I zoomed in on the high-resolution scan, examining the ink strokes with forensic precision. It was flawless. The specific loop of the C, the sharp angle of the A, the precise slant I used on official tax forms and bank documents. Anyone glancing at it would verify it as my authentic, legally binding handwriting. But I knew, with absolute chilling certainty, that I had never held a pen to that particular piece of paper. The loan process required stringent dual authentication. It mandated a digital signature matched with a physical, notarized document, scanned directly into the banking system. I downloaded the complete verification packet. Someone had meticulously forged my signature to leverage $500,000 of my secured inheritance. The sheer audacity of the crime was breathtaking. A standard identity thief would try to drain a checking account or max out an unsecured credit card. Only someone intimately familiar with my financial architecture, my exact handwriting style, and the strict protocols of this specific trust fund could bypass the institutional security measures so seamlessly. I stared at the forged ink on the screen, my analytical mind breaking down the mechanics of the fraud. To execute a collateral loan of this magnitude against a locked trust, the perpetrator needed my social security number, my mother's maiden name, the original account routing numbers, and a heavily manipulated notary public. The list of suspects capable of orchestrating this exact combination of requirements was incredibly short. My mind raced through the possibilities, eliminating suspects, until only the most horrific truth remained. I ran an immediate trace on the IP address used to originate the digital loan request. The geolocation software processed the data and pinpointed a residential broadband network located in the North Shore. I recognized the specific service provider and the unique network identification tag. It was the exact router located in my father's private home office. Next, I examined the digital notary stamp pressed at the bottom of the PDF document. The name registered to the seal was an administrative assistant who worked directly at Richard's corporate firm. The scattered pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. Patricia and Richard had actively conspired to forge my signature. My own parents had committed massive federal identity theft to steal $500,000 from my grandfather's trust. They bypassed my security to secure a massive loan I would eventually be liable to repay, all while smiling in my face and demanding I surrender my expensive wedding venue to my cheating sister. The ultimate betrayal was no longer just about infidelity. It was a highly organized criminal conspiracy executed by the very people who raised me, and I was going to burn their entire fake empire to the ground. My fingers flew back to the keyboard, executing a deep forensic trace on the disbursement of the $500,000. If my parents had orchestrated federal fraud to steal my inheritance, I needed to know exactly where every single cent of that money had landed. I pulled the wire transfer receipts attached to the loan origination file. The bank had divided the payout into two distinct electronic transfers per Richard's specific instructions. I copied the routing numbers and ran them through the Financial Clearinghouse database. The first transfer was for exactly $200,000. I watched the screen as the tracking software mapped the digital journey of the funds. The money bypassed my parents' personal accounts entirely and landed directly in a corporate holding account registered to an LLC. I pulled the state business registry for the entity. The registered managing director was Trent. I dug into the LLC's operational ledger. It was a complete shell company bleeding cash from multiple angles, heavily leveraged, and clearly set up to catch the overflow from his failing wealth management portfolios. The pieces clicked together with sickening precision. Trent was deeply in debt, drowning in his own Ponzi scheme, and Richard knew it. My father, desperate to maintain the illusion of a high society wedding and secure a glamorous wealth manager son-in-law for his golden child, had essentially bribed Trent. Richard used my stolen inheritance to buy Trent's loyalty, plugging the holes in his sinking ship to ensure he stayed with Brittany and kept the country club facade intact. It was a massive illegal payoff disguised as a corporate investment. I shifted my focus to the second wire transfer. The remaining $300,000 followed a much more arrogant path. It dropped into a joint checking account controlled by Patricia and Brittany. The transaction log for this account read like a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. Within 48 hours of the funds clearing, a massive wire of $140,000 was sent to a luxury European auto dealership in downtown Chicago. I opened a new browser tab and navigated directly to Brittany's Instagram page. Her most recent post, uploaded just last week, featured her posing provocatively against the hood of a brand new custom-ordered Porsche. The caption read, "Hard work pays off, so blessed for this new chapter." The irony was utterly repulsive. She was not manifesting success. She was driving my stolen trust fund. The rest of the $300,000 had been rapidly draining away on a daily basis. I saw charges for first-class flights to Dubai, $15,000 shopping sprees at luxury boutiques in Paris, and monthly retainer fees for high-end public relations agencies that managed Brittany's influencer brand. Every single aspect of her glamorous online persona, the lifestyle she constantly rubbed in my face, the aesthetic she claimed proved she was superior to my boring corporate existence, was entirely funded by the money my grandfather had explicitly set aside for my future. They had robbed my safety net to purchase a fleeting digital illusion of grandeur. My mother had actively facilitated the theft to ensure her favorite daughter never had to experience the indignity of actually earning a living. This was no longer a simple matter of family drama, sibling rivalry, or a broken engagement. The parameters of the situation had fundamentally shifted from domestic betrayal to high-level corporate and federal criminality. I opened a new document on my desktop and began compiling a precise chronological legal index of their actions. Forging my signature on a collateral loan document constituted first-degree identity theft. Wire transferring the fraudulently obtained funds across state lines to offshore gambling accounts and shell companies constituted multiple counts of federal wire fraud. Falsifying the digital notary stamp was a severe state felony that would trigger automatic disbarment and prison time for the assistant involved. My parents and Trent were not just toxic narcissists playing games with my emotions. They were an active criminal syndicate, and they had left a digital paper trail so wide, arrogant, and undeniably documented that any competent federal prosecutor could secure an indictment within hours. But I did not want just any prosecutor handling this case. I needed to maintain absolute control over the detonation sequence. I needed a legal shark who understood the intricate, ruthless mechanics of corporate financial law and who would not hesitate to completely annihilate my parents' precious social standing in the process. I closed the banking portal, securely encrypted the massive file of evidence I had just compiled, and picked up my phone. I navigated to my contacts and scrolled down to Jamal. Jamal was my brother David's husband. He was a brilliant, highly aggressive corporate litigation attorney at one of the most feared law firms in downtown Chicago. He was also a black man who had spent the last 7 years enduring my parents' relentless, subtle racism, their passive-aggressive elitism, and their constant suffocating attempts to exclude him from the perfect family image. Richard and Patricia constantly belittled Jamal's immense professional achievements and treated his loving marriage to David as an embarrassing secret they had to hide from their wealthy country club friends. Jamal endured their toxicity with silent, dignified grace, purely for David's sake, but I knew his brilliant legal mind cataloged every single insult and slight. Jamal despised my parents just as much as I did, perhaps even more. He understood exactly how their absolute obsession with image, wealth, and status dictated their every move. I needed someone who would not be swayed by pathetic emotional pleas about family loyalty or forgiveness. I needed a relentless legal executioner who would genuinely relish the opportunity to hold them fully accountable in the harshest way possible. I tapped his name and initiated the call, watching the peeling wallpaper of the motel room as the line rang. My family thought they had broken me, but they had merely armed me. The trap was finally ready to be set. The line rang only twice before Jamal answered. His voice was crisp and professional, likely expecting a client call this early in the workday. When I spoke my name, his tone shifted immediately to a warm, brotherly concern. He already knew about the canceled wedding. David had texted him the news the moment my photo hit the family group chat. Jamal offered his sympathies, but I cut him off gently. I told him I did not need sympathy. I told him I needed his legal expertise, and I needed it off the record, away from any family radar. I asked him to meet me in an hour. He did not hesitate or ask unnecessary questions. He simply named a small, independent coffee shop, tucked into a narrow side street in downtown Chicago, far from the towering glass building where he worked, and even further from the North Shore suburbs my parents dominated. I packed my encrypted laptop, printed physical copies of the most damning evidence, and slid them into a thick manila folder. The long drive into the city was a surreal blur of gray concrete and heavy morning traffic. I parked 3 blocks away and walked to the cafe, the cold wind biting through my blazer. I found Jamal sitting at a secluded corner table in the back facing the main door. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, sipping a black coffee while typing rapidly on his phone. He looked up as I approached, his sharp brown eyes assessing my demeanor instantly. I sat down across from him, bypassing pleasantries entirely. I placed the heavy manila folder squarely in the center of the scratched wooden table. I told him Trent was a fraud and my parents were federal criminals. I slowly pushed the thick folder directly toward him. Jamal opened the folder without saying a single word. As his eyes scanned the first page of bank statements and wire transfer logs, I watched the subtle shifts in his expression. Jamal was a partner at one of the most ruthless corporate litigation firms in the country. He dismantled corrupt executives for a living. But observing him read the undeniable proof of my parents' crimes brought a profound sense of validation. For 7 years, Jamal had endured the suffocating toxic environment of my family with remarkable grace entirely out of love for my brother David. David was a dedicated pediatric nurse, kind-hearted and very soft-spoken, which made him an utter disappointment in my father's eyes. When David married Jamal, my parents' response was a masterclass in passive-aggressive bigotry and elitism. Richard and Patricia never explicitly hurled slurs, but their racism was woven deeply into their polite country club smiles. They consistently introduced Jamal to their wealthy friends simply as David's roommate, or their legal consultant, deliberately erasing his status as their son-in-law. They strategically excluded him from formal family portraits intended for their holiday cards. During dinners, my father would loudly question affirmative action policies, aiming pointed, condescending looks directly at Jamal. My mother constantly suggested that Jamal's aggressive career path was unsuitable for a proper family dynamic, completely ignoring the fact that he out-earned my father. Jamal never once lost his composure or his temper. He simply responded with razor-sharp intellect, politely dismantling their veiled insults with a calm, terrifying intelligence that left them fumbling for words. He saw exactly who Richard and Patricia were from the very first day. He recognized their desperate need to project wealth and superiority to mask their moral bankruptcy. He knew they worshipped Brittany because she fed their vanity, and he knew they exploited me because I was reliable and quiet. Jamal and I shared a silent mutual understanding. We were the highly competent outsiders observing a crumbling empire of narcissists. Now reading the heavily documented proof of their financial depravity, the polite restraint Jamal had maintained for 7 years completely vanished. He flipped to the digital notary logs and the forged collateral loan authorization. He traced the routing numbers linking my stolen inheritance to Trent's failing shell company and Brittany's luxury car dealership. He read the transcript of the audio recording where my mother laughed about forging my signature. He spent exactly 20 minutes absorbing the full magnitude of their federal offenses. Jamal carefully closed the manila folder and rested his hands flat on top of it. He looked up at me, his dark eyes burning with a sharp, dangerous intensity. He did not offer empty platitudes or fake shock. He processed the facts like a predator identifying a profound vulnerability in its prey. A slow, terrifyingly serene smile spread across his face. He leaned forward across the small wooden table, lowering his voice to a pitch that commanded absolute authority. "Clara," he said evenly, "this is not a family dispute. This is a highly coordinated syndicate of wire fraud, identity theft, and severe violations of Securities and Exchange Commission regulations. Your fiancé is facing a decade behind bars, and your parents just handed us the matches to burn their country club reputation straight to ashes." He tapped his index finger deliberately against the thick folder. "So before I mobilize my team and start drafting subpoenas, I need to know exactly how far you are willing to take this." He held my gaze, his expression completely devoid of mercy. "Do you want them to grovel and apologize? Or do you want them in a federal prison?" I honestly did not hesitate. The memory of my parents ordering me to hand over my wedding venue to my cheating sister flashed in my mind, extinguishing any remaining trace of familial loyalty. "Both," I replied to him, my voice completely steady and cold. "I want them to realize they lost everything, and then I want them locked away." Jamal's smile widened, revealing a genuine thrill. He extended his hand across the small table. I shook it firmly, cementing our alliance. We were going to legally and absolutely destroy them entirely. With the timeline perfectly established, Jamal shifted our focus directly to Trent's massive corporate crimes. We needed to ensure that when the hammer finally fell, it fell with the absolute full weight of the United States federal government. Jamal opened his own heavily encrypted laptop and immediately began drafting a formal whistleblower report addressed directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. We sat shoulder to shoulder in the quiet coffee shop, mapping out the precise flow of the stolen capital. I provided Jamal with the exact routing numbers from the dummy corporate accounts, the offshore gambling syndicate IP addresses, and the specific client portfolios Trent had unlawfully drained over the past year. The sheer volume of his deceit was breathtaking, but numbers never lie. Jamal formatted the raw data into a devastatingly clear legal narrative. He explained that submitting a highly detailed, evidence-backed dossier to the SEC would instantly trigger an aggressive investigation. The feds do not play games with licensed wealth managers who flagrantly commingle high-net-worth client funds. Jamal attached the verified digital footprints showing exactly how Trent systematically siphoned money to cover his catastrophic gambling losses. We structured the formal complaint to ensure maximum collateral damage to Trent's firm, guaranteeing the partners would immediately freeze his corporate access and completely cut him off from any potential legal defense funds. The detailed whistleblower complaint left absolutely no room for misinterpretation or clever legal loopholes. Every stolen dollar was meticulously accounted for, transforming his careless theft into a concrete federal indictment. We scheduled the secure digital submission to execute precisely on Friday night. The timing was absolute perfection. The SEC agents would spend the entire weekend processing the sheer magnitude of the financial fraud, positioning them to act at the exact moment Trent believed he had permanently secured his lavish new life. We were actively weaponizing his own extreme greed against him, ensuring the federal authorities had a flawless roadmap to orchestrate his complete professional and personal destruction. While the SEC handled Trent, Jamal moved swiftly to secure my personal safety and initiate the lethal strike against my parents. He began drafting emergency ex parte motions to present to a judge first thing Wednesday morning. These legal motions would immediately and silently freeze all my remaining financial assets, completely locking down my personal savings and the untouched principal of my grandfather's trust fund. The bank would automatically reject any further withdrawal attempts, permanently cutting off my parents' access, without notifying them until the legal hold was fully executed. Once my accounts were officially protected from further bleeding, Jamal turned his focus to Richard and Patricia. He prepared the formal criminal referral for first-degree identity theft and felony wire fraud. He carefully attached the metadata from my father's residential IP address and the digital logs of the highly forged notary stamp. They would pay for every single fraudulent signature with years of their freedom. Jamal explained that presenting this undeniable evidence to the federal prosecutor's office would bypass local jurisdictions entirely. My parents' elite country club connections and local wealthy golf buddies could not possibly save them from federal criminal indictments. Jamal worked with terrifying efficiency, organizing the extensive legal filings so they would move silently through the court system. My parents would remain completely blind to the impending avalanche. They would spend the next 3 days drinking expensive champagne and bragging about their elite social status, entirely unaware that a federal judge was reviewing the exact documents that would lead to the immediate seizure of their mansion and their imminent arrest. The sheer arrogance of their scheme made mapping their sudden downfall incredibly satisfying. They truly thought I was just a weak obstacle to be easily discarded. They had no idea they had triggered a catastrophic financial execution. I watched Jamal close the final digital file, feeling a profound sense of absolute peace settle deeply into my bones. The trap was fully set, perfectly engineered, and legally airtight. Now all I had to do was smile. The clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal flute cut through the low hum of wealthy chatter. My father, Richard, stood at the head table, positioned beneath a massive chandelier. He adjusted his silk tie and smiled out at the sea of eager faces. The room fell into silence as he gripped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here tonight to celebrate the union of two truly extraordinary people. Richard boomed, his loud voice echoing with practiced corporate authority. He looked down at Trent and Brittany, who were holding hands and gazing up at him with matching expressions of manufactured adoration. When Trent first came into our lives, I knew immediately he was a man of exceptional caliber. He understands the art of the deal, the value of hard work, and the importance of maintaining a flawless public image. To be completely honest with all of you, Trent is exactly the son I always wanted. I took a slow sip of my cold, sparkling water, feeling the familiar, painful sting of his casual cruelty. Across the room, I caught the eye of my brother David, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat next to Jamal. My father had just publicly dismissed his own biological son in favor of a desperate gambling addict actively running a Ponzi scheme. Richard raised his glass much higher, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. Trent and my beautiful Brittany are the ultimate power couple. They belong together. They represent the best of our family legacy. They are driven, glamorous, and destined for absolute greatness. Let us toast to a lifetime of massive success and prosperity for the happy couple. The crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. Trent stood up to hug my father, slapping him on the back with practiced masculine camaraderie. They looked like two kings admiring their conquered territory, completely oblivious to the massive federal guillotine hanging directly over their heads. While my father commanded the room from the stage, my mother Patricia conducted her own ruthless campaign of social domination on the floor. As soon as the speeches concluded and the string quartet resumed playing, she began making her rounds from table to table. I watched her perfectly manicured hands flutter in the air as she leaned in to gossip with her wealthy friends. She wore a smug expression, ensuring every guest understood the magnitude of the financial spectacle they were attending. "Oh, we simply had to double the floral budget." Patricia laughed loudly, addressing a table of wives belonging to Trent's biggest investors. Brittany has such a refined eye for design, and we absolutely refuse to compromise on her vision. We are looking at $1 million weekend when all is said and done, but seeing my darling girl so happy makes every penny worth it. The women cooed and nodded in agreement, sipping their expensive wine. I sat perfectly still at my table, observing the disgusting display of maternal pride. Every penny she bragged about was actively tracked by federal investigators. She was literally boasting about the physical evidence of her own felony wire fraud to a room full of people who would soon be subpoenaed as witnesses. The narcissistic delusion required to steal your oldest daughter's inheritance and then brag about spending it on your youngest daughter's fake fairy tale was genuinely breathtaking. Patricia eventually made her way toward my table, her heavy perfume announcing her arrival before she even spoke. She placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing it with a tight, warning grip that contradicted her artificial smile. "Clara, darling," she chimed, making sure the neighboring tables could hear her benevolent tone. "I am so glad you are holding up so well tonight. It takes a mature woman to step aside and accept when a man simply finds his true match. You are being such a good sport about all of this." I looked up at her, maintaining my calm, professional facade. I took another slow sip of my sparkling water before responding. "I just want everyone to get exactly what they deserve, Mom," I replied, my voice smooth and perfectly even. Patricia patted my shoulder again, oblivious to the lethal double meaning in my words. "That is the spirit," she said before fluttering off to corner another group of investors. I watched her walk away, my mind calculating the exact number of hours she had left as a free woman in polite society. She thought she had successfully manipulated the narrative, painting me as the tragic outcast while elevating Brittany to royalty. She had no idea her entire social empire was currently built on quicksand. I scanned the room one last time, committing every arrogant smile and boastful laugh to memory. Trent was across the room, shaking hands with the very clients he was actively defrauding, projecting the image of a titan of industry. Brittany was posing for photos, her stolen diamond necklace catching the light of the chandeliers. They were all so desperately consumed with their own reflections, they never bothered to look closely at the shadows. I set my glass down on the crisp white tablecloth, feeling a deep, cold satisfaction settling into my bones. The rehearsal was over and the main event was finally about to begin. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his long legs, projecting the casual posture of a bored wedding guest. But underneath the pristine white tablecloth, his hand brushed against my knee. I reached down. His fingers pressed a small, heavy object into my palm. It was a square velvet box, the exact size and shape of a traditional jewelry case, completely covered in deep red fabric. Right beside it, he pressed a sleek metal USB drive into my hand. I curled my fingers tightly around both items, pulling them securely into the hidden pocket of my blazer. Jamal leaned slightly toward me, pretending to inspect his crystal water glass. When he spoke, his voice was a barely audible whisper, completely masked by the loud, booming laughter erupting from Trent's table across the room. "The SEC agents are fully briefed," Jamal murmured, his tone as sharp and cold as a scalpel. "The whistleblower report hit the director's desk with maximum priority early this morning. They spent the entire day tracing the offshore routing numbers you provided. The case is ironclad, Clara. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division has officially joined the task force. They are going to freeze his corporate accounts, seize his personal assets, and lock down every single shell company he established." I kept my eyes fixed on the extravagant floral centerpiece in front of me, making sure my facial expression remained entirely blank. "And my parents," I whispered back, not daring to look in their direction. Jamal took a slow sip of his water, a flicker of dark satisfaction passing over his face. "The state prosecutor's office received the identity theft and wire fraud documentation this afternoon. The digital forensics on that fake notary stamp were beautifully undeniable. They are preparing the arrest warrants as we speak. As for the property, the bank foreclosure on your parents' house automatically triggers on Monday morning at exactly 8 o'clock. The legal hold on your trust fund is completely locked in place. They cannot access a single dime to hire a high-powered defense attorney. We severed their financial oxygen supply entirely." The weight of the velvet box in my pocket felt like a loaded weapon. We had done it. We had successfully engineered a comprehensive, inescapable federal trap that would completely annihilate their fraudulent empire. Jamal gave me one final approving nod before turning to engage David in a quiet conversation about basketball, perfectly resuming his role as the ignored brother-in-law. I shifted my gaze back to the head table where the guest of honor was currently holding court. Trent had one arm wrapped tightly around Brittany's waist, leaning in to whisper something in her ear. She threw her head back and let out a bright theatrical laugh that carried across the entire ballroom. Trent pulled her closer and kissed her deeply, a picture-perfect display of romantic devotion, designed exclusively for the benefit of his wealthy investors watching from the audience. They looked so incredibly invincible in that moment, surrounded by staggering luxury, drowning in imported champagne, and basking in the absolute adoration of the Chicago elite. Watching them kiss, I felt a profound sense of absolute finality. This was the peak of their delusion. This lavish, sickeningly expensive rehearsal dinner was the very last night Trent and Brittany would ever sleep in peace. By tomorrow night, they would be legally married permanently, binding Brittany to a man carrying millions of dollars in federal restitution debt. She thought she was securing a lifetime of country club memberships and exotic overseas vacations. She was actually signing a legally binding contract to share a staggering financial crater she could never possibly climb out of. Trent thought he had successfully secured his perfect financial shield, totally unaware that the woman he betrayed was the exact architect of his imminent federal indictment. My parents were currently standing near the mahogany bar, clinking glasses with a prominent real estate developer. Richard was laughing loudly, his face flushed with expensive wine and pure arrogance. Patricia was beaming proudly, showing off photos of the floral arrangements on her phone to anyone who would pay attention to her. They had willingly sacrificed their oldest daughter, stolen my inheritance, and committed serious federal crimes just to secure this exact moment of social triumph. They had traded their freedom for a temporary illusion of grandeur. When Monday morning arrived, the bank executives would seize their massive North Shore estate, the federal agents would knock on their door with handcuffs, and every single elite friend in this room would aggressively sever ties with them to avoid the toxic fallout. The dinner service slowly transitioned into rich coffee and decadent desserts. Waiters moved silently through the room, clearing away the fine china and crystal glasses. The loud, boastful conversations began to taper off as guests prepared to leave and rest for the massive wedding ceremony tomorrow. I remained in my seat perfectly still, feeling the cool metal of the USB drive pressing against my leg. The silent countdown in my head had officially begun. Every second that ticked by brought them one step closer to their absolute destruction. I watched Brittany grab her designer purse and kiss our mother on the cheek, projecting the image of a glowing, blissful bride-to-be. She shot a quick, condescending glance in my direction, expecting to see a broken, defeated woman drowning in bitter jealousy. I offered her a polite, totally empty smile in return. Let her enjoy her stolen diamond necklace and her stolen groom for one more night. Let my parents enjoy the false security of their stolen wealth. Tomorrow they would step into a trap they could never escape, and I would be the one holding the microphone. Saturday morning broke with a crisp, clear sky over the Chicago skyline, delivering the perfect weather my parents had essentially bribed the universe to provide. I arrived at the five-star downtown hotel venue 2 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, walking through the gilded revolving doors and stepping straight into a crime scene disguised as a fairy tale. The grand ballroom was a staggering monument to financial fraud. I stood silently near the mahogany entrance doors, letting my forensic mind calculate the exact dollar amount of the stolen assets surrounding me. Massive cascades of imported white orchids tumbled down the walls and framed the towering floor-to-ceiling windows. I knew the floral budget alone had consumed nearly $50,000 of my grandfather's trust fund. In the center of the sprawling room, two massive, intricate ice sculptures flanked a six-tier champagne tower, catching the brilliant light of the crystal chandeliers overhead. Dozens of frantic event coordinators rushed past me, barking orders into their headsets and adjusting the pristine silk chair covers. Every single luxurious detail, from the embossed gold leaf menu cards to the monogrammed velvet napkins, represented a direct federal wire transfer originating from my stolen inheritance. Trent and Brittany were literally building their glamorous, picture-perfect beginning on the stolen foundation of my life savings. It was a grotesque, overwhelming display of sheer narcissistic entitlement. I watched a team of caterers carefully construct a massive seafood display featuring imported caviar and fresh lobster, quietly calculating how many years in a federal penitentiary this specific appetizer station would cost my father. They had completely drained my financial safety net to buy a fleeting illusion of high society dominance, completely blind to the fact that they were simply decorating their own execution chamber. I smoothed the fabric of my pale blue bridesmaid dress, a muted, unflattering color my mother had specifically chosen to ensure I faded into the background. I did not mind fading into the background today. Predators always hunt best from the shadows. I walked past the staging area where a string quartet was warming up their instruments, humming a classical tune that cost $3,000 an hour. Trent's wealthy investors were already beginning to mingle in the VIP lounge, sipping top-shelf scotch and discussing their portfolios, completely unaware that their wealth manager was actively running a Ponzi scheme using this very wedding as a shield. The entire morning was a perfectly choreographed lie, and I was the only person in the building holding the absolute truth. I made my way down the carpeted hallway toward the bridal suite to assume my required position. Before I could reach the heavy oak door, my mother stepped out into the corridor and intercepted me. Patricia wore a custom-tailored silver gown that clung perfectly to her frame, her neck adorned with a strand of rare pearls. She grabbed my arm and pulled me into a quiet alcove near the elevator banks, her grip surprisingly strong. She checked the hallway to ensure no elite guests were within earshot before leaning in close. Her expensive perfume was thick and suffocating. "I am so proud of you for finally accepting your place," Clara, my mother whispered, her tone laced with a sickening blend of pity and triumph. "You are behaving with such quiet dignity today, and it reflects very well on the family. Let us be completely honest with ourselves. You were never meant for a man like Trent anyway. He requires a woman who shines, someone who commands attention and understands the delicate art of high society networking. You have always been far too plain and far too obsessed with your tedious little numbers to keep a man of his caliber satisfied. Brittany is simply giving him the life he deserves." You should be grateful she stepped in before you embarrassed yourself in a marriage you could never handle. I stared directly into her eyes, absorbing the absolute venom of her words, without letting a single muscle in my face twitch. She genuinely believed my quiet compliance was a symptom of pathetic weakness. She needed to break my spirit one final time to validate her own horrific crimes. "You are entirely right, Mom," I replied, my voice chillingly smooth and devoid of any hesitation. "Trent and Brittany absolutely deserve each other. They are a perfect match in every single way, and I promise you they are going to get exactly what they have earned today." Patricia smiled, completely missing the lethal promise hidden just beneath my words. She patted my cheek condescendingly and turned back toward the bridal suite. An hour later, the orchestral music swelled, signaling the beginning of the ceremony. I stood rigidly at the front of the grand hall, gripping a bouquet of white roses, playing the role of the tragic supportive sister to absolute perfection. The heavy oak doors opened and Brittany began her slow, dramatic march down the aisle. She looked radiant, practically glowing with the thrill of her stolen victory, her $15,000 designer gown sweeping across the white petals scattered on the floor. Trent stood at the altar, looking like a victorious king, projecting an aura of immense wealth and untouchable success. I watched with cold, calculating eyes as they joined hands beneath a massive arch of imported flowers. The officiant spoke poetic words about trust, loyalty, and building a foundation of honesty. The hypocrisy was so dense it was almost suffocating. Trent looked deeply into Brittany's eyes and promised to protect and cherish her. Brittany promised to stand by him through wealth and hardship. They exchanged heavy platinum rings, sealing their fraudulent union with a passionate kiss, as the audience of wealthy investors and country club elites erupted into deafening applause. But the true climax of the ceremony happened 10 minutes later in the private signing room behind the main hall. I stood silently in the corner as the wedding planner placed the official state marriage license on a polished mahogany table. Trent confidently took the pen and signed his name. He handed the pen to Brittany. She smiled brightly, leaned over the table, and signed her name right next to his. The ink dried onto the heavy paper. The legal trap snapped shut with a resounding invisible click. They were officially married. Under the law, they were now completely bound together in shared financial liability. Trent's massive federal fraud, his crippled shell companies, and his impending SEC indictments now belonged entirely to Brittany. The Golden Child had just legally anchored herself to a sinking criminal ship, and she had absolutely no idea. I smiled, feeling the cold metal of the USB drive waiting patiently in my pocket. The grand ballroom of the five-star hotel was a masterpiece of manufactured prestige. 300 of Chicago's most elite figures filled the room. Richard had invited his most prominent business partners, the men who controlled local real estate syndicates and country club boards. Trent had stacked the guest list with his high-net-worth clients, the very people whose portfolios he was actively draining to fund his crippling gambling addiction. I walked through the sea of designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos, blending perfectly into the background in my dull blue bridesmaid dress. Waiters in pristine white jackets glided seamlessly between the tables, pouring continuous streams of vintage champagne and serving hors d'oeuvres on silver platters. The entire room buzzed with the arrogant laughter of the untouchable wealthy class. I recognized several managing partners from Trent's wealth management firm sitting near the front, drinking top-shelf scotch and praising his apparent financial acumen. They clinked their glasses together, completely oblivious to the fact that their star manager was a walking federal indictment. The hypocrisy hung in the air, thick and cloying. Every single clink of a crystal glass, every bite of the imported caviar, was a direct insult to the hard-working people they exploited, and a direct theft from my grandfather's trust fund. I took my assigned seat at the far end of the bridal party table, maintaining a perfectly blank expression. Jamal and David sat at a nearby table, blending in flawlessly with the corporate crowd. Jamal caught my eye through the sea of moving guests and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The federal traps were fully locked. The Securities and Exchange Commission whistleblower complaint was officially under review by senior agents. The bank foreclosure on my parents' North Shore estate was securely queued for Monday morning. All the financial dominoes were perfectly aligned in the dark, waiting for a single push. The sheer concentration of doomed wealth in this one room was intoxicating. They were all eagerly celebrating a magnificent illusion, entirely unaware that the marble floor beneath their expensive shoes was about to completely cave in. I watched Patricia glide between tables, her neck dripping with pearls, accepting congratulations from her country club rivals. She was at the absolute peak of her social climbing career, entirely funded by felony wire fraud. The lavish five-course dinner finally concluded with a parade of waiters bringing out a towering gold-leafed wedding cake that cost more than a standard college tuition. The lights in the grand ballroom dimmed slightly, shifting the focus to the massive stage at the front of the room. Brittany was absolutely glowing at the center of the head table. She had changed into a second designer gown for the reception, a sleek diamond-encrusted number designed to catch every flash of the photographer's cameras. She held court like a victorious queen, waving to her influencer friends and blowing dramatic kisses to our mother, who was sobbing performative tears of joy from the VIP family table. Trent was not even sitting beside his new bride. He was aggressively working the room with desperate calculated charisma. I watched him lean over the table of his largest investors, laughing loudly and slapping them on the back, securing their trust while actively plotting how to steal their next round of capital to cover his offshore debts. The wedding planner, a frantic woman gripping a heavily highlighted clipboard, tapped the microphone to signal the beginning of the evening toasts. The best man delivered a generic alcohol-fueled speech about Trent's impeccable loyalty and stellar moral compass, which required every ounce of my willpower not to laugh out loud. My father followed, marching onto the stage to deliver a booming, boastful monologue about family legacy, financial dominance, and the enduring power of our family name. He looked directly at me during his speech, offering a smug, terrifyingly cold warning glare that silently demanded I sit still, keep my mouth shut, and accept my complete and utter defeat. When my father finally stepped down from the stage to a round of thunderous applause, a heavy, expectant hush fell over the 300 elite guests. It was officially the maid of honor's turn to speak. The wedding planner gestured frantically toward me from the shadows of the stage. I stood up slowly from my chair at the end of the bridal table, smoothing the front of my unflattering dress. I reached into the hidden pocket of my blazer and pulled out the square red velvet box Jamal had given me at the rehearsal dinner. The small, sleek metal USB drive was concealed perfectly in the palm of my other hand. As I walked deliberately toward the center stage, the entire ballroom went dead silent. The tension was thick and suffocating. Every wealthy investor, every country club socialite, and every member of my treacherous family watched my approach with a mixture of intense, morbid curiosity and deep, condescending pity. They all knew the scandalous backstory. They all knew Trent was my fiancé just a few short weeks ago. They fully expected a pathetic, tearful, and broken speech from the jilted sister who had been graciously allowed to participate in her more beautiful sister's ultimate triumph. Brittany leaned forward in her seat, a vicious, triumphant smirk playing on her lips, visibly eager to drink in my public humiliation. Trent paused his networking and crossed his arms over his chest, looking at me with pure, unadulterated disdain. My mother gripped the edge of her table so hard, her knuckles turned white, her eyes flashing a silent threat to stick to the approved script. I stepped up to the microphone, placed the red velvet box gently on the wooden podium, and looked out over the sea of arrogant faces. The time for hiding was officially over. I tapped the microphone twice. The sharp percussive thumps echoed through the cavernous ballroom, instantly silencing the few remaining whispers. 300 faces stared back at me, a sea of diamonds, designer tuxedos, and judgmental expectations. I looked directly at my mother, whose eyes darted nervously between me and the exits. I looked at my father, his chest still puffed with the arrogance of his own speech. Then I turned my gaze to the center of the head table. Brittany sat there draped in stolen silk, her lips pursed in a mocking, victorious pout. Beside her, Trent checked his luxury watch, visibly annoyed that my mere presence was delaying his opportunity to secure more fraudulent investments from the wealthy uncles in the crowd. I leaned into the microphone, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my voice devoid of any emotional tremor. "Good evening," I began, my tone crystal clear and echoing across the extravagant room. "For those of you who do not know me, my name is Clara. I am Brittany's older sister. Until exactly 72 hours ago, I was also Trent's fiancé." A collective sharp intake of breath swept through the ballroom. The absolute directness of my opening line shattered the polite country club etiquette my parents worshipped. My mother's face drained of all color. Richard half stood from his chair, a warning growl forming in his throat. But Jamal shifted his stance nearby, silently daring my father to intervene. I ignored them all, focusing my absolute attention on the newly married couple. "Tonight we are gathered to celebrate a very specific kind of union," I continued smoothly, letting the words hang heavily in the air. "A union built on shared values, mutual ambitions, and secrets kept in the dark. It is customary for the maid of honor to offer a heartfelt reflection on the couple's journey. I have spent the last 3 days thinking deeply about how to properly honor their unique bond. Tonight, I want to give my sister and her new husband a gift that truly reflects exactly what they have given me." I reached into my pocket and retrieved the sleek metal USB drive. The cold, heavy casing felt perfect against my fingertips. This was not a weapon forged in anger or hysteria. It was a precise, calculated instrument of forensic justice. I looked toward the elevated audiovisual booth at the back of the ballroom. The lead technician, a sharp young man, whom Jamal had discreetly approached and generously compensated hours before the reception began, caught my eye. He gave me a single confirming nod. The hotel management thought they were running a standard wedding slideshow filled with childhood memories and romantic vacation photos. They had absolutely no idea they were about to facilitate a federal financial execution. I stepped to the side of the podium and smoothly plugged the metal drive into the designated presentation laptop resting on the stand. I did not break eye contact with Trent as my fingers tapped the keyboard to initiate the sequence. I saw the exact moment the arrogant confidence began to curdle and die in his chest. His posture stiffened. The smug networking smile completely vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden primal realization that he had drastically underestimated the woman he thought he could use as a blind financial shield. He started to push his chair back, his hands gripping the edge of the pristine white tablecloth, desperate to stop whatever was about to happen. Brittany, entirely oblivious to the shifting power dynamic, just rolled her eyes and crossed her arms, clearly expecting a pathetic montage of my tears, or a desperate public plea for forgiveness. She leaned forward, eager to bask in what she assumed would be my ultimate degrading surrender. I stepped back to the center of the microphone. "I have prepared a short presentation to highlight the true foundation of this beautiful marriage," I announced, my voice carrying an icy, terrifying calm. I raised my hand and gave the technician the final signal. The massive ballroom lights immediately dimmed to a dramatic theater-level darkness. Conversations completely flatlined. Every single eye in the room turned toward the enormous projector screen dropping down slowly behind the spectacular head table. The high-definition projector hummed to life, casting a brilliant, blinding white rectangle across the wall. It was supposed to be the moment the crowd cooed over baby pictures and college graduation snaps. Instead, the screen flashed and a massive, crystal-clear image materialized directly above Brittany's head. It was the high-resolution photograph I had taken inside my master bedroom in Winnetka just 3 days prior. The image was blown up to 15 feet tall, exposing every single horrifying detail in flawless, undeniable clarity. There was Trent, naked and terrified, desperately pulling my expensive duvet over his chest. And right beside him was Brittany, the radiant bride, tangled in the very sheets I had purchased for my marital bed, her face frozen in a pathetic, guilty gasp. The silence in the ballroom lasted for exactly 2 seconds. It was the kind of deep, absolute vacuum that occurs right before a bomb detonates. Then the shockwave hit. A woman in the front row dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the marble floor with a piercing crash, breaking the spell. The entire room erupted into pure, unadulterated chaos. 300 elite guests gasped in collective horror. Whispers instantly escalated into shouts of disbelief and outrage. I watched the prominent real estate developers and wealthy investors, the men Trent had been aggressively courting all night, physically recoil from the head table, as if the bride and groom were suddenly contagious. Brittany's face turned an unnatural, sickly shade of white. She looked up at the massive screen, then out at the crowd of judging, disgusted socialites, her mouth opening and closing silently. The glamorous illusion she had stolen my money to create vaporized instantly. She was no longer the triumphant, beautiful bride securing a wealthy executive. She was exposed to the entire North Shore elite as a treacherous, backstabbing sister caught in the most degrading position imaginable. Trent bolted upright, his chair crashing backward onto the floor. He threw his hands up, shouting wildly at the AV booth to cut the feed, his face slick with sudden, terrified sweat. Patricia shrieked from the VIP table, burying her face in her hands as her precious country club reputation went up in spectacular, very public flames. Richard lunged forward, his face purple with absolute fury, but the image remained burning brightly on the screen, branding their profound shame into the minds of every single powerful person in the room. The trap was sprung, and there was no going back. Before the initial shockwave of the photograph could even begin to settle, before my father could reach the edge of the stage, or Brittany could formulate a single lie, the presentation software executed its programmed command. The massive screen flickered automatically, advancing to the second slide. The illicit bedroom scene vanished instantly, replaced by a stark, high-contrast display of corporate ruin. The new image was a meticulously arranged collage of Trent's highly confidential banking statements, wire transfer logs, and the offshore gambling syndicate's hidden ledgers. I had spent hours ensuring the font and layout matched standard forensic accounting presentations, leaving absolutely zero room for plausible deniability. In the top left corner, the screen clearly displayed the $80,000 systematically drained from my personal joint savings account. Arrows traced the stolen funds directly into Trent's failing shell companies and unregulated sports betting profiles. The sheer volume of his crippling debt was laid bare for the entire North Shore elite to witness. But the true devastation lay in the center of the screen. I had projected his heavily doctored client portfolios right next to his actual catastrophic deficit. The numbers proved he was completely bankrupt and actively stealing from the very people drinking his imported champagne. To ensure the message was entirely inescapable, I had overlaid a massive bold red banner across the bottom third of the projection. It read in inescapable block letters, SEC, investigation pending. The collective reaction shifted instantly from scandalous gossip to raw financial terror. The murmurs of infidelity were completely erased by the sudden realization of massive economic fraud. Trent froze, the blood draining from his face as he stared at the screen. He looked like a man who had just been shoved out of an airplane without a parachute. He knew instantly that his entire career was completely over. The wealthy uncles, the syndicate managers, and the elite investors who had been slapping his back and praising his acumen just 20 minutes ago suddenly went rigid in their seats. They were no longer looking at a successful groom caught in a messy family love triangle. They were looking at a desperate, cornered thief who held the keys to their retirement funds and corporate assets. I watched their eyes dart from the glowing red letters on the screen to the man sweating profusely at the head table. I did not give them a single moment to process the visual destruction before I launched the next phase of the execution. I tapped a key on the podium laptop, dropping the visual projection to a blank black screen. The sudden darkness forced the ballroom into complete silence. Then I hit play on the audio file. I had recovered a deleted voicemail from Brittany's cloud backup during my late-night audit, and I had instructed the audiovisual technician to route the playback directly through the venue's state-of-the-art surround sound system. Suddenly my mother's shrill, unmistakable voice echoed off the crystal chandeliers, and the marble walls amplified to a deafening volume. "Are you sure the notary stamp cleared?" Patricia asked through the speakers, her tone laced with arrogant impatience. Brittany's bright, giggling voice immediately responded, filling the ballroom with her sheer malice. "Yes, Mom. The $500,000 loan is completely approved. The money hits our joint account tomorrow morning. Trent is getting his bailout, and I am ordering the Porsche. I cannot believe it was that easy." The entire ballroom held its collective breath, listening to the bride gleefully confess to a massive federal crime. Patricia sighed through the audio recording, a sound of profound, condescending relief. "Well, thank goodness I practiced her signature," Patricia said, her voice dripping with maternal pride over her own felony. "I told you there was nothing to worry about. She is just a corporate drone. She will never check the trust. By the time she is 60, the loan will be long forgotten." The audio clip ended with the sharp, sickening sound of my mother and sister laughing together. That cruel, mocking laughter bounced off the walls of the grand ballroom, burying them alive. Patricia collapsed back into her chair at the VIP table, physically shrinking under the weight of her own broadcasted confession. The wealthy socialites sitting beside her physically moved their chairs away, treating her like an active biohazard. Richard stood paralyzed halfway to the stage, his face an agonizing mask of sheer horror as he realized his wife and golden child had just proudly confessed to first-degree identity theft and federal wire fraud in front of 300 highly influential witnesses. Brittany grabbed the sides of her head, completely destroying her carefully pinned bridal hair, screaming for someone to turn the speakers off. She looked around the room, realizing that every single designer brand she wore was now publicly branded as stolen property. But the silence that followed the recording was even louder than their laughter. The profound shock finally broke and the room descended into absolute uncontrollable chaos. Trent's investors, the men who had trusted him with millions of dollars in liquid capital, stood up in unison. Chairs crashed backward onto the polished marble floor. These were ruthless businessmen who did not tolerate being played for fools. They aggressively pulled out their cell phones, furiously dialing their corporate attorneys and private bankers, desperate to freeze their portfolios before Trent could drain another dime. One of the lead investors, a massive real estate tycoon, marched directly toward the head table. His face twisted in pure rage, shouting demands about his missing capital. Other guests scrambled toward the exit doors, eager to escape the epicenter of a massive federal crime scene before law enforcement inevitably arrived. The elegant million-dollar wedding reception had instantly transformed into a frantic, hostile stampede. Trent backed away from the table, his hands raised in a pathetic attempt to pacify the furious mob of clients advancing on him. He was completely cornered, trapped by his own greed and the legal binding of his brand-new marriage. The destruction was total, flawless, and deeply satisfying. Jamal released my father's arm and took a deliberate, measured step back, smoothing the lapel of his tailored tuxedo jacket with absolute composure. The ballroom around us was still swirling with frantic activity, but the space between Jamal and Richard felt completely frozen in time. Without breaking eye contact, Jamal reached smoothly into the inner breast pocket of his jacket. He withdrew a thick, heavily sealed stack of official legal documents. The crisp white paper stood out starkly against the dim flashing lights of the panicked reception. Jamal raised the heavy stack of documents and slapped them forcefully right against the center of Richard's chest. The sharp smack of paper hitting silk echoed over the surrounding noise. Richard reflexively brought his hands up, catching the thick bundle of papers before they could slide to the floor. He stared down at the official seals, his eyes widening in pure horror as he recognized the distinct insignia of the United States federal government. Federal court summons for wire fraud and identity theft. Richard Jamal stated, his voice resonating with deep, unwavering conviction. You and Patricia are formally ordered to appear before a federal magistrate on Monday morning. The bank foreclosure on your estate is already processing, and the asset freeze on Clara's trust fund is absolute. You have zero access to her money, zero access to your own leveraged accounts, and absolutely zero way out of this indictment. You spent years treating me like a second-class citizen in your home, Richard. I spent the last 48 hours ensuring you will spend the next decade as a registered federal inmate. The remaining color drained completely from my father's face. The arrogant patriarch of the North Shore elite looked down at the court summons, finally comprehending the inescapable reality of his own criminal actions. While my father stood paralyzed by his federal indictment, the situation at the bridal table had deteriorated into pure violent chaos. Trent, realizing his freedom and his life were evaporating, made one final desperate play for control. He scrambled over the fallen chairs, shoving past the furious investors, and lunged for the backup microphone on the bandstand. He desperately tapped the mic, begging his clients to listen, shouting that there had been a massive misunderstanding and that their portfolios were completely secure. His pathetic attempt at damage control did not last 10 seconds. Two of his largest corporate clients' men, who had just realized their retirement funds were gone, marched right up to the edge of the bridal platform. Without a single word of warning, they hurled their expensive crystal champagne glasses directly at Trent. The glasses shattered violently against his chest and the microphone stand, spraying expensive vintage champagne all over his pristine wedding tuxedo. Trent ducked, dropping the microphone as it let out a piercing shriek of feedback, completely surrendering to his public destruction. He curled into a pathetic, cowardly ball behind the head table, shielding his face from his enraged former clients. Beside him, Brittany was experiencing the total collapse of her carefully curated influencer universe. She fell to her knees in the center of the wreckage, screaming hysterically. Heavy dark streaks of waterproof mascara mixed with her foundation running down her cheeks and dripping onto the delicate lace bodice of her $15,000 stolen gown. She clawed at her own hair, wailing my name, calling me a monster for destroying her perfect fairy tale. She was drowning in a sea of shattered crystal, furious investors, and absolute public humiliation. The golden child was finally experiencing the exact devastating consequences of her own actions. I stepped down from the wooden podium, my fingers firmly grasping the small red velvet box. The surrounding ballroom was in a state of complete anarchy, with security guards rushing through the heavy oak doors to contain the furious investors. But a strange protective bubble of silence seemed to form directly in my path. I walked slowly toward the ruined head table, my heels clicking with deliberate rhythmic precision against the polished marble floor. Brittany was still collapsed on the ground, her hands clutching the shredded silk of her $15,000 designer gown. She looked up at me through a mask of smeared mascara and running foundation, her chest heaving with desperate, ragged breaths. She reached a shaking hand toward the edge of the table, desperately trying to pull herself up from the wreckage of her shattered fairy tale. I stood directly over her, looking down at the absolute destruction of my sister. I raised the red velvet box so she could see it clearly. This was the moment I had meticulously calculated since that Tuesday morning in the cheap motel. I popped the brass latch. The hinge snapped back with a sharp, echoing click. I reached inside and pulled out the thick stack of premium legal-grade paper Jamal had expertly prepared. The documents were heavily stamped with the unmistakable blue and red seals of the United States federal court system. I unfolded the crisp pages, making sure the bold, capitalized headings were perfectly visible under the glare of the remaining chandelier lights. The first document was the official asset freeze authorization, completely locking down every single bank account tied to Trent's name, and by legal extension, Brittany's brand new marital assets. The second document was the formal bank foreclosure notice for my parents' sprawling North Shore mansion, triggered by the fraudulent collateral loan they had used to fund this very reception. The sheer weight of these papers represented the absolute end of their glamorous stolen universe. I held the undeniable proof of their financial execution right in front of her tear-stained face, letting her eyes scan the federal insignias that guaranteed her incoming poverty. I wanted her to fully comprehend that her entire life of privilege was officially terminated by the exact same sister she had spent 3 decades mocking and belittling. I leaned over the edge of the pristine white tablecloth and let the heavy stack of federal documents drop. They landed with a dull thud right on top of Brittany's gold-leafed dinner plate, knocking over a crystal water glass and soaking the expensive menu. I brought the microphone back up to my lips, making absolutely certain that my final words to her would echo across the entire chaotic ballroom. "I bought you a wedding gift, Brittany," I said, my voice echoing with a chilling, absolute serenity. "I wanted to make sure you started your new life with total financial transparency. You were so incredibly eager to steal my fiancé and secure your position as a wealthy executive's wife. You practically ran down the aisle to sign that state marriage license today. But you should have let me audit the groom first. By signing that binding legal contract, you did not secure a luxury lifestyle. You legally tethered yourself to a man who owes millions in federal restitution. You own his massive corporate debt now." I paused, letting the devastating reality of her massive legal liability sink into her panicked brain. Her eyes widened in pure horror as she stared at the asset freeze documents resting on her wet plate. "Enjoy your honeymoon," I continued, my tone dropping to a razor-sharp edge. "Because by Monday morning, every single one of your joint bank accounts will be completely frozen by the federal government. They are going to seize your custom Porsche. They are going to liquidate your entire designer wardrobe to pay back Trent's defrauded clients. You are entirely bankrupt, and your influencer career is completely dead. And just in case you thought about running home to mommy and daddy for a quick financial bailout, you can forget about that too. The feds will be seizing the North Shore house at 8 o'clock on Monday morning. You took my fiancé, but I took your entire future. You have absolutely nothing left. Your entire superficial existence has been legally dismantled. Every single person in this room knows exactly what you are, and no one will ever sponsor or support a woman married to an indicted federal scam artist. You wanted the spotlight so badly, Brittany, and now you finally have it." Brittany let out a piercing, hysterical wail, scrambling backward across the floor, as if the legal documents on her plate had suddenly caught fire. I did not stay to watch her completely unravel into a sobbing, pathetic mess. I simply opened my hand and let the heavy microphone slip from my fingers. It plummeted to the marble floor, hitting the hard surface with a massive crash that sent a loud, agonizing screech of electronic feedback tearing through the venue speakers. People clamped their hands over their ears, cringing from the sharp, deafening noise. I turned my back on the screaming, crumbling remains of my treacherous family. I walked away from the ruined bridal table, my head held high, my posture projecting absolute, unshakable power. Jamal and David immediately stepped out from the chaotic crowd, falling perfectly into step on either side of me. They flanked me like a highly trained security detail, their broad shoulders clearing a wide path through the stunned, whispering guests. We walked straight down the center aisle of the grand ballroom, the heavy wooden doors swinging open ahead of us, leaving the smoking wreckage of their fake empire firmly behind us. Exactly 1 month later, the chaotic screaming and the shattering crystal of that grand ballroom felt like a distant, fading memory. I sat behind a massive mahogany desk in my brand-new corner office located on the 40th floor of our downtown Chicago headquarters. The promotion from senior forensic accountant to regional director of corporate investigations came highly recommended and heavily compensated. My firm was incredibly impressed with the sheer volume of meticulous financial tracking I had unilaterally executed to expose a massive domestic fraud ring. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the morning sunlight reflect off the calm waters of Lake Michigan. My personal bank accounts were fully secured. My grandfather's trust fund was completely locked under my exclusive control with enhanced biometric security, and the air in my new office smelled of fresh espresso and absolute victory. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my dark roast coffee, relishing the profound, highly structured silence of my new reality. That perfect silence was briefly interrupted by the sharp professional buzz of my desk phone. I tapped the speaker button and leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair. Jamal's deep, smooth voice filled the spacious room. "Good morning, Madam Director," Jamal greeted me, his tone rich with genuine satisfaction. "I just received the official update from the federal prosecutor's office, and I thought you might appreciate hearing the final tally of our coordinated strike." I smiled, keeping my eyes fixed on the beautiful city skyline stretching out beneath me. "I am always ready to review a finalized ledger." Jamal tell me exactly how the numbers balanced out in the end. Jamal chuckled, a low rumbling sound of pure legal triumph before opening his briefing file. "It is a beautiful day for absolute accountability, Clara. Let me walk you through the absolute devastation of their fraudulent empire. Let us start with this groom," Jamal said, shuffling some heavy paperwork on his end of the line. Trent did not even try to mount a legal defense. When the Securities and Exchange Commission froze his corporate assets and the federal agents raided his firm on that Monday morning, he panicked completely. He abandoned his new bride alone at their heavily mortgaged luxury condo and attempted a desperate, frantic run for the southern border. The FBI caught up with him at O'Hare International Airport on Tuesday night. He was literally standing in line at the departure gate, holding a one-way first-class ticket to Mexico City and carrying a leather duffel bag stuffed with whatever liquid cash he could scrape together from his remaining burner accounts. The federal agents apprehended him right there in front of hundreds of traveling businessmen. He put up a pathetic struggle, screaming that he was a victim of a corporate conspiracy, but the agents simply handcuffed him to a metal bench while they meticulously cataloged the stolen cash in his bag. The sheer volume of his financial crimes made any chance of bail entirely impossible. He has been sitting in a cold federal holding cell for the past 4 weeks, crying to any public defender who will listen to his pathetic excuses. The lead prosecutor informed me this morning that Trent officially agreed to a full plea deal to avoid a highly publicized, drawn-out trial. He formally confessed to multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and violating strict federal financial regulations. Because he targeted high-net-worth investors and actively stole millions to fund his offshore gambling syndicates, the judge showed absolutely zero leniency. He is facing a mandatory minimum of 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without any possibility of early parole. His license to manage wealth is permanently revoked, and his name is officially listed on the Federal Registry of Banned Financial Operatives. He will be nearly 50 years old by the time he breathes free air again, and he will walk out of prison owing millions in active court-ordered restitution. He thought he could use you as a convenient financial shield to hide his massive crimes, but his sheer arrogance ultimately built his own inescapable concrete cage. "And what about the radiant bride?" I asked, allowing a slow, cold smile to form on my face. Jamal let out a sharp laugh. Brittany's downfall was even more spectacular because it happened entirely in the public eye. When the news of Trent's massive federal indictment broke, her carefully curated Instagram empire collapsed overnight. Her followers realized her entire luxurious aesthetic was funded by stolen money and felony wire fraud. Her account was aggressively mass-reported by furious users. The platform permanently suspended her profile for violating community guidelines regarding fraudulent behavior. Every single major brand sponsor dropped her within 48 hours, issuing public statements legally distancing themselves from her toxic name. But the social ruin is absolutely nothing compared to her current legal reality. By eagerly signing that state marriage certificate, she legally bound herself to Trent's catastrophic financial estate. The federal government seized the custom Porsche she bought with your stolen trust fund money. They confiscated her designer wardrobe, her imported jewelry, and every single expensive gift Trent ever gave her to help pay back the defrauded investors. She is now legally liable for a massive portion of the remaining millions in court-ordered restitution. She currently works 50 hours a week as a receptionist at a cheap strip mall real estate office, and every single paycheck she earns is immediately garnished by the federal government. She is completely broke, entirely ostracized from her elite social circles, and permanently trapped under a mountain of federal debt she can never possibly repay. She wanted the spotlight so badly, and now she is paying the ultimate price for it. She thought she stole a luxury lifestyle from you, Clara, but all she really managed to steal was a direct ticket to a lifetime of crippling poverty. The golden child is now officially and completely bankrupt for the entire foreseeable future. Jamal took a steady breath, his voice shifting into a colder, more absolute tone as we moved to the final chapter of our audit. And then Clara. There are your parents. Richard and Patricia finally faced the very reality they spent their entire lives running from. The bank foreclosure on their massive North Shore estate was executed with flawless corporate efficiency on that Monday morning. They were physically escorted off the pristine property by local sheriffs, completely stripped of the lavish sanctuary they had proudly maintained for decades. The federal charges for first-degree identity theft and wire fraud hit them simultaneously, freezing every single hidden asset and retirement account they possessed. Because the sheer magnitude of their crimes involved defrauding a generational trust, the court showed absolutely zero mercy. They are currently out on bail, scrambling to find any legal loophole, but entirely unable to afford private counsel. Instead, they are relying on overworked public defenders who have already advised them to accept a plea deal while they anxiously await their federal trial. Their beloved country club elite, the wealthy neighbors and influential golf partners they spent a lifetime trying to impress, abandoned them instantaneously. Patricia's name was officially struck from every charity board and social registry in the city, treating her like an active contagion. The women who used to drink her expensive imported wine now crossed the street to aggressively avoid making eye contact. Stripped of their stolen wealth and completely exiled from high society, Richard and Patricia are currently living in a dingy, cheap motel located just off the interstate, miles away from the affluent neighborhoods they once ruled. Richard, a man who once commanded boardrooms with pure intimidation, now spends his days pacing the stained carpet of a roadside motel, completely broken by the reality of his own actions. They are trapped in a small, stale room that smells of cheap bleach and profound regret, sleeping on terrible mattresses while waiting for the federal judge to hand down their inevitable prison sentences. Their entire arrogant empire was entirely built on a mountain of desperate lies, and now they have to spend the rest of their miserable lives suffocating underneath the rubble. Jamal formally ended his report, wishing me a wonderful morning before hanging up the phone. I sat in the absolute pristine silence of my beautiful new office, feeling the heavy, satisfying weight of total justice settle perfectly into my life. Just as I turned back to my financial reports, my personal cell phone buzzed against the polished mahogany desk. The screen lit up, displaying an unknown local number. My forensic training immediately flagged the anomaly, but my profound curiosity won out. I pressed the green button and lifted the phone to my ear, remaining completely silent. Heavy, ragged breathing echoed through the receiver, followed by a desperate, pathetic sob. "Clara, please do not hang up." Patricia's voice sounded incredibly small, broken, and entirely stripped of her usual commanding arrogance. She was crying hysterically, the sound of passing highway traffic echoing faintly in the background of her cheap motel room. I pictured her sitting on a sagging motel bed, clutching a cheap prepaid burner phone, because the federal agents had confiscated all their expensive electronic devices during the initial raid. "We have absolutely nothing left, Clara. The lawyers say we are going to federal prison. Your father can barely get out of bed, and the bank took everything we own. Please, Clara, I am begging you to call the federal prosecutors and drop the identity theft charges. We made a terrible mistake, but you have to forgive us. We are still your family." I listened to her frantic, desperate pleading for exactly 3 seconds. I processed the sheer audacity of a woman who orchestrated the theft of my entire inheritance, now demanding my salvation simply because we shared a bloodline. I did not feel a single ounce of pity, anger, or sadness. I felt absolutely nothing but cold professional detachment. I pulled the phone slightly away from my ear and spoke in a perfectly calm, even tone. "I do not know anyone by that name." I lowered the phone, pressed the red button to end the call, and immediately tapped block on the unknown number. I set the phone down and walked over to the towering glass windows of my corner office. I looked out over the sprawling, magnificent grid of the city, watching the morning traffic flow like a river of endless opportunity. For 33 years, I believed I was obligated to endure their constant emotional abuse simply because they were the people who raised me. I allowed their toxic expectations to diminish my worth, and I accepted their cruelty as a standard condition of family loyalty. But standing here, entirely free from their parasitic grip, I finally understood the absolute truth. Cutting out a toxic bloodline does not leave you isolated or alone. It removes the heavy, suffocating rot from your life and makes profound, beautiful room for real peace. I realized that the ultimate revenge is not about matching their vicious cruelty or staying trapped in a cycle of endless retaliation. The ultimate revenge is simply moving forward and succeeding wildly without them. I have officially closed their account, zeroed out their emotional deficit, and permanently removed them from my personal ledger. I built my entire sanctuary on a foundation of undeniable truth, strict boundaries, and absolute financial independence. I am no longer the forgotten scapegoat or the reliable victim. I am the architect of my own incredibly bright future, and I will never let anyone compromise my balance sheet ever again. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If you have ever had to make the difficult but necessary decision to completely cut toxic family members out of your life to protect your own peace, I want to hear how you found your strength. Share your experiences in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about claiming your power and demanding absolute justice. Remember, your peace is your most valuable asset. Never let anyone steal it from you. The narrative masterfully dismantles the pervasive societal myth that blood relations demand unconditional loyalty, particularly in the face of profound emotional and financial abuse. The most resonant lesson illuminated by this journey is that true security and self-worth are forged through unyielding boundaries, not by silently enduring a toxic family dynamic. For decades, the protagonist accepted the role of the reliable scapegoat, allowing her family's insatiable narcissism to dictate her worth and drain her resources. People are often conditioned to forgive familial betrayals under the guise of keeping the peace. But this meticulously calculated retaliation proves that peace built on compliance is merely a prison. When confronted with the ultimate betrayal, a partner's infidelity orchestrated alongside her parents' staggering financial fraud, she did not succumb to expected emotional hysteria. Instead, she weaponized her absolute independence. The events underscore that abusers, even those sharing our DNA, rely entirely on their victims' silence and fear of social disruption. By systematically removing her emotional and financial support, she exposed the fragile, hollow foundation of her family's elite facade. Walking away is rarely an act of surrender. It is the ultimate declaration of personal power. Genuine healing requires the immense courage to view the people closest to us through a lens of absolute truth, completely stripped of sentimentality. We are never obligated to set ourselves on fire simply to keep destructive relatives warm. Recognizing that you can legally and emotionally sever ties with a toxic bloodline to create a sanctuary of your own making is the most liberating audit one can perform. Our ultimate loyalty must always remain with our own peace and uncompromised integrity. Take a moment today to evaluate the boundaries in your own relationships and fiercely protect your peace from anyone who seeks to diminish it.